Then there's a passage that follows in which Hobbes itemizes one by one the further reasons why the good order in government that animals achieve spontaneously can only be achieved by human beings artificially. He says, secondly, those creatures aim every one at peace and food common to them all. Men aim at dominion, superiority, and private wealth, which are distinct in every man and breed contention. Thirdly, those living creatures, let's say other animals, that are without reason, have not learning enough to espy, or think they espy, any defect in government, and therefore are contented therewith. But in a multitude of men, there are always some that think themselves wiser than the rest, and strive to alter what they think amiss. And divers of them strive to alter divers ways, and that causeth war. Fourthly, they want speech. That's to say, animals don't have speech, and are therefore unable to instigate one another to faction, which men want not. Fifthly, they have no conception of right and wrong, but only of pleasure and pain, and therefore also no censure of one another, nor of their commander, as long as they are themselves at ease. Whereas men that make themselves judges of right and wrong are then least at quiet when they are most at ease. Lastly, natural concord, such as it is amongst those creatures, the other beasts, is the work of God by way of nature, but concord amongst men is artificial and by way of covenant, and therefore no wonder if such irrational creatures as govern themselves in multitude do it much more firmly than mankind that do it by arbitrary institution. Well, these problems are minimized in Leviathan, where Hobbes does not repeat this Lucretian comparison between humans and other animals, but they still exist. In Leviathan, Hobbes, discussing deliberation, states simply that this alternative succession of appetites, aversions, hopes, and fears is no less in other living creatures than in man, and therefore beasts also deliberate. He is clear that the deliberative process involves a minimalist concept of will as the end to which, and he's very clear that this concept of will is different from the scholastic faculty of willing. It does not take much deliberation to see that such a concept of will puts slender legs under the mighty concept of covenanting, if it remains coherent at all. And it simply will not sustain the distinction made so clearly in the elements between the fragile and artificial order to which covenanting humans must resort due to their natural fractiousness, compared with the spontaneous order achieved in the animal kingdom. If feeling, passions, deliberation, will, and reason do not differentiate humans from other animals, what does? Hobbes' answer is quite simply that humans have religion and other animals don't. And religion, like science, is a consequence of looking for causes, that peculiarity of humans as creatures living in fear. To quote Leviathan chapter 12, seeing there are no signs nor fruit of religion, but in man only, there is no cause to doubt, but the seed of religion is also only in man, and consisteth in some peculiar quality, or at least some eminent degree thereof, not to be found in other living creatures. Firstly, because it is the nature of man to be inquisitive into the causes of the events they see, in the search of the causes of their own good and evil fortune. Second, upon the sight of anything that hath a beginning, to think also it had a cause which determined the same to begin, when it did, rather than sooner or later. And thirdly, because whereas there is no other felicity of beasts, but enjoying of their quotidian food, ease, and lusts, and beasts have little or no foresight of the time to come, for want of observation and memory of the order, consequence, and dependence of the things they see. It is peculiarly noteworthy that Hobbes should differentiate animal behavior from human so systematically on the basis of an absence in animals of the fear of the future that is the wellspring of natural religion in humans. In this respect, his account accords with modern biology, which emphasizes the comparative weakness of human instincts with that of other animals, which are compensated in the human case by cultural defenses. The political economy of animals, accordingly, does not produce the cognitive skills that humans must acquire to cope with fear. So man, to quote, "Man observeth how one event hath been produced by another, and remembereth them in antecedence and consequence. And when he cannot assure himself of the true causes of things, for the causes of good and evil, fortune for the most part are invisible, he supposes causes of them, either such as his own fancy suggesteth, or trusteth the authority of other men, such as he thinks to be his friends and wiser than himself. Imagination and the capacity to erect artificial defenses against the fear of the future, chief of them being that artificial construct, Leviathan, differentiate humans from other animals, and this produces cognitive development in humans that is also lacking in other animals, along with its social consequences. But the view humans have of the world is not necessarily superior to that of other animals, along with its, just because their initial deficiency, being prey to fear, induces systematic distortions that are behaviorally compounded. For fear in the absence of causes leads humans, unlike other animals, to overshoot in the explanation of these causes, postulating invisible powers that empower them to enslave them. It is this great edifice of externalized fear, which is what religion to Hobbes represents. All sorts of imagined incorporeal entities had their role to play in raising the fear stakes, peopling an imaginary world of spirits incorporeal that are unintelligible, but understood dogmatically or piously. As used by the Epicureans, religion, from relegare, to bind fast in Latin, is the term employed by Hobbes equally for religion or superstition, as it was by the Epicureans. And following Lucretius, De Rerum Natura 1, 102-3, Hobbes claims early in Leviathan that the power of priests was deliberately based on the exploitation of superstition. But if religion cannot be distinguished from superstition, Hobbes does not privilege science either. If, to quote, "when a man reasoneth, he does nothing else but conceive a sum total from addition of parcels, or conceive a remainder from subtraction of one sum from another, to which we affix names, science, correspondingly, is nothing more than, to quote, a knowledge of all the consequences of names appertaining to the subject in hand. There is no safe haven in which to take shelter, and humans have no greater access to truth than other animals. 4, knowledge of fact, to quote Leviathan, chapter 5, pertains to sense and memory, and to that animals have equal access." Thank you.
La discussione aperta. Prego.
Thank you very much to Patricia for this enlightening talk. I have simply to ask a question and to make a remark. First, the question. Did you ever find in ancient Epicureans and Stoic remains, sources, the word curiosity or something that is equivalent to it? This for the question. For the remark, I think that the relationship between Hobbes and the possible Epicurean sources and neo-Epicurean sources in the 17th century is extremely complex, multifaceted, and in some way even ambiguous. I'll give just one example. If you have a look at the commentary made by Pierre Gassendi in these famous 10 years of Hobbes' exile in Paris, the commentary made by Pierre Gassendi to the Curiae Doxae, the capital doctrines of Epicurus, where the basic, the main tenets of the Epicurean doctrine about politics, justice, and law are given. You can find, for example, one of these capital maxims that speaks about to tes physeos dikaion, which must be translated literally dikaion, that is right, not law, tes physeos, rather according to nature than of nature. So we have no law of nature, but rather some right according to nature. And this is a clear opposition between Hobbes, who speaks of law of nature, and also with Hobbes, who thinks that this order given by law is absolutely artificial and not following the pattern of nature. So even in this commentary, which is a commentary made by Pierre Gassendi, which is full of hints to the Hobbesian political doctrine, for example, there is a clear distinction between animals and men. Animals cannot make a covenant because they have no language, and so this is a real Epicurean point that Gassendi and Hobbes share with the ancient Epicurean sources. But at the same time, you have a notion of law of nature, which is, I could say, rather the opposite of the Epicurean doctrine about to tes physeos dikaion.
Thank you. To answer your first question, yes, curiosity definitely features very importantly in Lucretius. In fact, Hobbes in the Historia Ecclesiastica more or less repeats the theogony of, you might say, of Lucretius, or the Kulturgeschichte, as Thomas called it. He talks about human curiosity having originated in people's observation of the stars. I mean, actually, if you think about it, if you've ever been in the outback of Australia and looked at the sky looks as though it has measles, and all these things are moving up there, you can see them all. And it was quite reasonable, I think, of the Epicureans to say that people on Earth would have been this would have been a major preoccupation to try to explain what was going on in the sky. And so Lucretius certainly puts huge emphasis on curiosity, and even makes the case for science as being part of human culture that was necessary for self-preservation. In terms of the curiae doxae, I've looked very carefully at the curiae doxae. I don't think Gassendy's representation of them is very accurate, to be honest, because I think it's one of, they're called also the moral sentences. I think it's 33 or 36, in which Epicurus maintains that justice only pertains to humans. The gods have got no need of it. And that justice only comes into being with the social contract. And that what the social contract specifies is just, and what it omits is unjust, which is exactly Hobbes' position. So, I mean, in my preamble, I tried to say that my account was very schematic, and clearly Hobbes was addressing 17th century discussions and not 4th century and 5th century BC discussions. And through whom they are mediated, I suspect, as you have pointed out, Lorenzo Valla is an important source, but we still don't have enough context to say through whom this was mediated. Gassendi, as you've also stressed, was a very important source, but it's interesting that Hobbes' position is different from Gassendi's.
Merci pour toutes les deux très belles relations. J'ai une question pour Christina. Christina, tu as dit que pour le clerc dont la curiosité ne peut pas avoir une connaissance certaine à cause de sa faiblesse épistémologique et qui apporte à la confusion, c'est cause de la confusion, si j'ai bien compris. Ma question est, j'ai trouvé très intéressant ça, soit ta référence évidemment à l'entretien et soit à la Genèse, à l'édition philologie, critique, etc. Et donc je trouve qu'il y a une espèce, mon impression, j'ai une espèce de décalage, d'incohérence, je ne sais pas si on peut dire, chez le clerc, chez le philologue, disons, qui a une telle attention à le mot, à la parole, et aussi à la utilité de la parole, du travail érudit, etc. Et encore la clarté, bien sûr, mais il n'arrive pas à comprendre que la curiosité, ce n'est pas une cause de confusion, justement, mais à travers la parole, c'est le mot est un élément de connaissance. Donc, je trouve un peu un décalage, on trouve, enfin, entre son travail théologique et son travail philologique. Est-ce que tu as eu une impression pareille ou pas?
Alors, écoute, je pense que, disons, c'est pas véritablement de l'incohérence. Finalement, disons, je crois que la récupération de la curiosité comme valeur positive se fait justement à travers la critique. C'est là, et justement, à travers la philologie, à travers l'étude des langues, à travers l'histoire. Et donc, disons, l'attaque qu'il mène contre la curiosité, en réalité, est bien ciblée. C'est contre la métaphysique, c'est contre une ingérence de la métaphysique dans les discours théologiques, dans les discours religieux. Et donc, c'est seulement, justement, disons, en remplaçant, je dirais, une théologie métaphysique par, disons, un retour à la Bible qui est médié par l'instrument herméneutique, qu'on peut arriver finalement une connaissance certaine des objets religieux. Donc, en réalité, ce n'est pas forcément de l'incohérence, c'est que, disons, c'est un déploiement du discours sur la curiosité à travers différentes, disons, manières d'aborder les objets.
Professor Springborg, I wanted to follow up briefly on what Gianni said, and then I wanted to ask you an independent question. It does seem that there are some requirements of the law of nature that probably don't depend on the social contract. I'm thinking here of equity as opposed to justice. We're told that the sovereign is bound by the requirements of equity, and this will be true even if he's sovereign by institution and is not understood to have made any sort of contract at all with his subjects. So that might suggest that there is a kind of independent law requirement prior to any sort of covenanting. This is just an observation. The question I wanted to ask you was about your suggestion that humans have no greater access to truth than other animals in Hobbes. And I wondered what you would say about Hobbes's claim that certain knowledge is really a consequence of the connections of the meanings of words, and that it depends fundamentally on language developed to such a degree that animals can't be expected to have it. So, conditional knowledge that, if such and such is the case, then such and such follows, is kind of conceptual connection sort of knowledge, is certain knowledge, and it seems like this at least would be unique to humans. And so I wonder what you think about that.
Well, to take the last question first, yes, but it's certain under only in a certain sense, because he is a thoroughgoing nominalist, and when he says that knowledge is just, in this case, the addition of names, it's not what any philosopher who subscribes to classical theory of truth would subscribe to. I mean, the classical theory of truth is that people have access to the world in itself, or things in themselves, as Aristotle and all the classic philosophers claimed. And Hobbes doesn't seem to claim this. So when he says that knowledge or truth is just the addition of names, he's a thoroughgoing nominalist like Occam and so on, the English Franciscan logicians whom he quite admired. I'm sorry, I've already forgotten the first question. Is your reply then that even though Hobbes may think of this as giving us knowledge of the world, it really doesn't? There's no such thing as certitude, I don't think, in Hobbes, and that's why when he more or less claims, maybe he's overstating it sometimes, it's very difficult. There's a lot that's very puzzling in Hobbes. I think, as I understand it, he's saying that that animals, humans and other creatures, deal with the real world in real time, so to speak, in much the same way. All of those people who think, for instance, that we don't see the real world in real time can't explain why it is that when people obey the traffic lights, they can cross the street, and when they don't, they're killed. So, I mean, you have to more or less assume, I think, that for operational reasons, humans and other animals have access to enough features of the real world in real time to be able to survive, and maybe that's built into the evolutionary system. And I don't think that Hobbes necessarily believes any more than that. And it's very interesting that the Epicureans specifically discussed the case of other animals. They discussed whether other animals can covenant or contract. So this was a very big issue among these ancients, and they maintained, I think, a very minimalist position on this, and I think personally that Hobbes shared it.
Bien, je voulais vous remercier pour ces variations qui rapprochent Hobbes de la tradition épicurienne, du point de vue de la curiosité, du point de vue du rapport aussi à l'animal, à la question de l'animal. C'est une question qui m'a beaucoup préoccupé, notamment autour d'un très grand poète, Jean de La Fontaine. La Fontaine qu'on compare souvent à la fois à Hobbes et à Gassendi, et qui donne à la réflexion sur l'animal un aspect qui tend vers Hobbes. Bon, alors, cela dit, la question que je voulais vous poser est la suivante. Votre interprétation de Hobbes va, comme vous le savez, contre toute une réception de Hobbes. Je vous lis par exemple une phrase très intéressante, à mon avis, qui pourrait servir en quelque sorte d'entrée dans ce colloque, une phrase de Montesquieu dans les Pensées. Et voilà ce que dit Montesquieu. Je voulais vous demander votre avis sur cet énoncé. La curiosité, principe du plaisir que l'on trouve dans les ouvrages d'esprit, point. Hobbes dit que la curiosité est particulière à l'homme. En quoi il se trompe, chaque animal l'ayant dans sa sphère de ses connaissances. C'est une pensée extrêmement subtile, puisqu'il s'agit ici de décrire le plaisir que l'on trouve dans les ouvrages de l'esprit. Alors je commentais moi-même cette phrase dans la partie de ma communication que je n'ai pas pu prononcer en rapport avec Saint-Évremont, parce que ce Montesquieu-là est très proche de Saint-Évremont, qui a été son maître à certains égards. Mais donc très proche du néo-épicurisme, justement, mais d'un néo-épicurisme qui se situe à la fois très près de Hobbes et en même temps qui marque ses distances vis-à-vis de Hobbes, comme Saint-Évremont. Donc je voulais vous poser la question, comment vous interprétez ce type d'interprétation de Hobbes comme s'étant trompé sur cette question animal-homme en ce qui concerne la curiosité, de façon très précise.
Thank you. I don't know enough about the French reception of Hobbes, but don't forget that most of the French initial reception of Hobbes is based on De Quiwe, where these issues don't really come up. And it wasn't until the Opera Philosophica of 1668 that so much of Hobbes's corpus became available in Latin. So I think that might be one reason why they wouldn't have given Hobbes this reading, but this interests me very much in the case of Montesquieu, and I'd like to hear more about it.
Merci. Ma question s'adresse à Christina. Oui, à mon sens, Leclerc est sur la corde raide en quelque sorte, et il est astiqué par un adversaire qui le met hors de lui, qui est Bayle. En ce qui concerne la compatibilité de la foi avec la raison, comment se défend-il contre Bayle sur la question du socinianisme, d'une part, et d'autre part, dans son exclusion de la métaphysique de la théologie, pourquoi s'acharne-t-il à défendre Cudworth contre Bayle et Nehemiah Gru à la fin de sa vie contre Bayle, puisque là, d'une part, il a tort, mais d'autre part, il s'aventure dans une métaphysique qui est en contradiction flagrante avec ses propres principes.
Bon, peut-être ce qu'il faut dire aussi, c'est que, tout mon propos, en fait, portait sur un ouvrage de jeunesse. Donc, c'est un ouvrage où c'est une période où encore, quand même, avec Bayle, il n'est pas véritablement entré, je dirais, en bataille. Ça commence, mais, de manière, pour le moment, un petit peu, détournée, pas directe. Pour ce qui concerne donc ces questions, pour ce qui est en tout cas du socinianisme, là aussi c'est il est aussi sur la corde raide, c'est-à-dire lui-même fait l'objet d'accusations de socinianisme. Il essaye tant bien que mal de se défendre de cette accusation, en réalité de manière qui n'est que seulement partiellement convaincante, parce que quand on va regarder par la suite les commentaires qu'il fait, par exemple sur les débuts, sur le prologue des gens, on voit que sa position est vraiment une position, qui pourrait se prêter en tout cas à des soupçons de socinianisme. Donc, c'est vrai que je crois que, dans ces cas-là, il faut voir probablement aussi les contextualisations. Très souvent, Leclerc réagit aussi par rapport à des circonstances très précises. et de sa vie, de ses polémiques, de son, disons, de son besoin de se défendre. Alors, pour ce qui concerne, par contre, coord et le fait qu'il se soit engagé justement dans la défense des natures plastiques vers la fin de sa vie, je crois qu'il faudrait plutôt tourner la question à Louise. Je crois que c'est elle qui a mieux travaillé ces questions que moi. Donc là, effectivement, c'est vrai que j'aurais pu, effectivement, par exemple, voir comment concrètement, par la suite, il met sa... Mais disons, ce qu'il y a, bon, je peux dire qu'en général, comment dire, ce n'est pas forcément... disons, il y a une sorte, malgré tout, de fil conducteur dans sa réflexion et dans sa pensée, mais avec beaucoup, je dirais, d'hésitation aussi et des ambiguïtés. Donc les ambiguïtés sont bien là. Mais sur la question, donc je ne réponds pas sur la question des natures plastiques, je n'ai jamais vraiment étudié chez Leclerc, donc éventuellement si d'autres veulent le faire. Mais en général, je dirais que c'est vrai que parfois on ne s'y retrouve pas toujours. On a un peu l'impression que parfois il s'est contredit, que parfois les discours, c'est pour ça que je disais finalement que aussi son discours sur la curiosité, malgré tout, c'est un discours clivé. Et il y a des exigences qui ne vont pas toujours ensemble. Sinon, finalement, le fait qu'il est très fortement remonté contre, disons, les orthodoxies et finalement, dans les petits portraits qu'il fait du théologien curieux de bonne foi, on voit très bien que c'est lui-même qu'il y a derrière. Donc, mais autrement, c'est un discours plutôt, disons, clivé, je dirais.
Malheureusement, il n'y a plus de temps pour la discussion parce qu'il y a le lunch et après vous aurez la visite à la Villa Farnesina et donc on ne peut pas dépasser les limites de temps.